I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I used the same voice I'd used since I was old enough to understand that emotion. In front of them was currency that never cashed. I told them the facts. I was in the hospital. The twins were asleep beside me. I needed someone here at 6 a.m. to take them home while I was in the OR. One morning. That was all. The line went quiet for just long enough that I knew they were together. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses in the background, laughter too loud to be coming from a private residence. My mother's voice cut through like polished glass. "Sweetheart, we're in the front row. Jazz festival. I told you. Remember, George Winston is playing tonight. We planned this months ago." I didn't answer. I don't think I blinked. My thumb slid along the phone screen, pressing the side button to end the call before I could absorb another syllable. The silence afterward was heavier than before. Not because it hurt, I had long since run out of tears for them, but because something tectonic shifted inside me in that moment. Not a break, not an explosion, just a deep, quiet click, like a lock disengaging. They weren't going to show up. Not now, not ever. I turned toward my boys. Their faces were still peaceful. They didn't know that their world had just contracted to the size of one person, one body, one parent with a scalpel scar ahead of her, and a mountain behind. They didn't ask for this, and they wouldn't remember this night, but I would carry it in my marrow. It wasn't about that single refusal. It was about the pattern. A lifetime of patterns so faint, so quietly embedded, that I had mistaken them for wallpaper. They had always loved conditionally, helped selectively, supported strategically, and I had always tried to earn it. Through silence, through obedience, through wiring money on the first of every month. After Mark died, I kept their lights on, paid the mortgage on their second home when Dad's investments tanked. Never once asked for reimbursement. Never once hinted that it was a strain. Because I was raised to believe that love is a debt, and loyalty is the minimum payment. Until now. Now, I was lying in a hospital bed, a tumor in my body, stitches in my future. 2 babies whose faces I had memorized more than I had ever memorized my own. And they were front row at a jazz concert, laughing, swaying, applauding a pianist who would forget their names by morning. There's a kind of clarity that only comes in antiseptic light. I don't know if it was the morphine, or the proximity to mortality, or just the exhaustion of pretending not to notice. But I saw it clearly now. My life wasn't a partnership. It was a performance, and they had been in the audience the whole time, critiquing, clapping when convenient, walking out early when they got bored. I turned my phone screen to the side, opened the banking app. My fingers hovered over the scheduled transfers tab like they were waiting for permission from someone else. But there was no one left to ask, no higher authority to please, no invisible judge tallying up my good daughter points. Just me. I canceled the transfer. And then I stared at the confirmation message on the screen. "Your automatic payment has been canceled. Effective immediately." It felt absurdly small, like ending a war by closing a tab. But wars don't always end with fanfare. Sometimes they end with silence. I reached for the notepad the nurse had left behind and scribbled one last note, not for them, but for myself. "This ends now." I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not the nurse who came in with her clipboard and polite small talk. Not the orderly who brought juice and crackers I wouldn't eat. I let the morning arrive on its own terms. Heavy and overcast, as if the sky had also canceled something overnight. The surgery went well, or so they said. I remember the anesthesia sliding into my veins like liquid ice, the ceiling tiles blurring together, then nothing until the sting of waking. When I opened my eyes, I asked for my boys. The nurse smiled and pointed to the bassinet across the room. They'd been transferred with me, slept the whole time. She said, angels. But angels shouldn't have to sleep on hospital vinyl. When we were discharged, I called a cab, buckled them in myself, wincing from the incision, pressing my hand to the wound like it could hold back everything: pain, blood, memories. Home was silent when we got back. The kind of silence that settles in when no one expects you. I laid them in their beds, made tea with shaking hands, and opened my laptop. I didn't write an essay. I didn't post on social media. I didn't scream into the void, demanding sympathy. I drafted a single message. Subject effective immediately. Body, you will no longer be receiving financial support from me. Do not contact me again. It was short, brutal. Maybe, but it had to be. There was no room left for poetic ambiguity. I read it once, then again, then I pressed send. I stared at the screen for a long time after that. Not because I doubted the decision, but because it felt like watching the final breath of a version of me that had been dying slowly for years. The compliant daughter, the good soldier, the invisible spine holding up a family that never looked back to see if I was still standing. I expected noise, a reply, a call, even just a snide remark from my mother. She always had one at the ready. But there was nothing. Just digital silence, a vacuum where obligation used to be. The first message came 2 days later, from my father. A clipped paragraph about misunderstandings and family hardship. No apology, no question about my health, just confusion why I'd done it so suddenly, as if I hadn't been holding the door open for 12 years, waiting for them to walk through it with a single ounce of grace. Then came the next message, my mother. A different tone entirely. Guilt-laced, wounded, accusatory in its softness. We were hurt by your tone. We've always done our best. Maybe you're forgetting all the things we've done for you over the years. She listed them. Bullet points of parental duties performed as if love were an invoice. Took you to dance class, bought your prom dress, sat front row at your graduation, as if any of that canceled out the years of dismissals, the gaslighting, the way they compared me to my sister like it was sport, as if keeping receipts made the debt mine to repay forever. I didn't answer either message. Silence is a response, too. They escalated, started sending emails to extended family, crafting a new version of events, in their retelling. I was unwell. I was struggling since the loss of Mark. I was lashing out due to emotional instability. They needed support from the community during this trying time. I watched the story spread like a carefully planted vine. I saw distant cousins post vague statuses. I noticed a few unfollows, a few quiet exits. For a moment, I felt it, the sting of being painted as the villain in someone else's redemption arc. But then, something shifted. It started with my cousin Olivia. She was never particularly close to me, but she'd seen things over the years. At Christmas, at weddings, quiet moments when my parents' favor tilted dangerously toward my sister. When they made jokes at my expense dressed as compliments. She sent me a message. "Are you okay? I heard the story. It doesn't add up." I told her the truth. Not the whole sob story, just the facts. The jazz concert, the canceled payment, the emails. Her reply was immediate. "That's what I thought, I'm sorry." Then came a message from Aunt Elise. Then another from my sister. That one surprised me. Not because she was siding with me, she wasn't, but because she was stunned. Genuinely. She'd believed the version our parents had fed her. Believed that I was the favorite, that I was spoiled, that she was the underdog. She called me that evening, and for the first time in our adult lives, we had a conversation that didn't feel like chess. "I thought you had it all together," she said. I didn't know you were paying for them. I almost laughed. Of course I was. Who else would they use? She went quiet. They told me you'd cut them off because of the inheritance. She whispered, There is no inheritance. I said, Just expectations I finally stopped carrying. The silence that followed felt different. Not empty, just real. No performances, no masks. Just two daughters on opposite sides of a lie, realizing they'd both been used. The next morning, I changed the locks. Not because I thought they'd show up my parents had always been more passive-aggressive than bold, but because I needed the ritual. There's a certain finality to watching an old key fail, like a door remembering who it belongs to. I swept the floors, did laundry, fed the twins. Pain flared every time I bent down, a sharp reminder that my body was still healing. But I didn't take the heavier meds. I wanted to feel this. Every pull, every stretch, pain can be grounding. When you've been floating in someone else's fog for too long, the boys didn't notice the difference. Not really. They still woke me up with sticky fingers and sleepy whines. Still laughed at shadows on the wall, still danced when music came on the radio. But something in me had shifted, and children notice that, even when they can't name it. At night, after they fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, not worried, not scared, just stilly. My phone would buzz sometimes, a withheld number, a voicemail I didn't check. Messages trickled in from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Curious ones, cryptic ones. Some that used the word ungrateful with a casual kind of venom, as if silence had become betrayal. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I had severed something people aren't supposed to touch. Family, that sacred cow we're all told to bow to. Even when it tramples us, there's this myth we carry, especially as women, that endurance is holy, that the more we suffer quietly, the more noble we are, that giving without limit makes us good. But goodness, I was learning, doesn't mean letting yourself be used like a credit card that never declines. I started to calculate. What had I given them over the years? 6 figures. Easily. Mortgage assistance, medical bills, travel expenses, my mother's cosmetic procedures, my father's golf club dues. And not once had they said they couldn't accept it. Not once had they paused to ask how I was doing with 2 infants and a dead husband and a body that kept betraying me in small, aching ways. They accepted the money with thank you texts and transactional affection, love that lasted until the next deposit. Then silence. And yet, the moment I said no, just once I became the villain in their narrative, I read the group email again. The one they sent out to our extended family, BCCing everyone like it was a press release. They described me as emotionally volatile, claimed I'd cut ties without explanation. They used words like shocking and worrying and ended it with a plea for compassion during this difficult time. It would have been laughable if it weren't so effective. People believe the first story they hear, especially when it comes from people with gray hair and a shared last name. Especially when the real story is messy, uncomfortable, and doesn't fit into neat moral boxes. But the cracks were showing. Olivia forwarded me a screenshot from one of the family group chats. One of my aunts had asked why, if I was so emotionally unstable. I'd never asked anyone for money. Why, if I was lashing out. I hadn't sent angry messages or made wild accusations. Why, if I was so troubled, the only thing I'd done was quietly stop paying their bills. Sometimes silence is the loudest rebuttal. Still, their version clung to people. Old friends called me distant. Church acquaintances sent vague prayers. It was exhausting in a way grief never was, because grief is honest. This was narrative warfare. So I did the only thing I could. I disappeared. I stopped answering calls. I cleared out social media. I changed the contact forms on my business site. I stopped explaining myself to people who'd never asked for my side until now. And then I did something new. I began building something of my own. It started small, an online memorial page for Mark. Nothing public, just something I could work on at night. When the house was still, a place to gather photos, stories, little notes, a digital graveyard where memory felt less like pain and more like warmth. But then someone saw it, a woman in my widowed parents' support group. She asked if I could build one for her late husband. Then another woman asked, and another. Each had a different story. Some with peace, some with bitterness, but all of them wanted something permanent, something sacred. So I said yes, and quietly, from my kitchen table, between nap schedules and recovery. I started a side business designing tribute pages for people who had loved and lost. People like me. People who didn't want to scream their grief into the void, but also didn't want to bury it in silence. It gave me more than income. It gave me perspective. My parents had demanded loyalty. My clients gave gratitude. My parents saw me as a source. My clients saw me as a builder. My parents extracted. These women connected. There's something ironic about finding healing through strangers when your own family sees your pain as inconvenience. But maybe that's the point. Sometimes it takes being erased to remember you exist. The messages slowed down. Not all at once. Abusers never give up the illusion of control without testing the lock a few more times, but they did begin to taper. Fewer guilt-laced emails, fewer indirect jabs through relatives. It was as if they were beginning to understand that I wasn't bluffing, that this wasn't some emotional tantrum waiting to pass, that I had, in fact, left. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was space. I filled it. I reorganized the house not for style, but for function. Shifted the pantry shelves so my sons could reach their own snacks. Moved the furniture to create more open play space. Donated everything that smelled like the past. The wool throw my mother gave me, but always reminded me was too expensive for everyday use. The photo frame she insisted on keeping full of family unity pictures that always cropped me wrong. Gone. I made room for breathing. The twins began to thrive in that space. They didn't ask for explanations, they were too young for that, but they adjusted like children do. My eldest started humming again while brushing his teeth. My youngest took to sleeping without a nightlight. Small shifts, barely noticeable to an outsider, but seismic to a mother. I began attending the widow support group more regularly. There was a woman there, Angela, who had the kind of face you don't forget. Sharp eyes, like she'd seen the worst of humanity and chosen to keep looking anyway. She spoke sparingly, but listened like it mattered. She was the one who first suggested I move. Not leave town entirely, just relocate, reset. You need to be somewhere your ghost doesn't live, she said over coffee after one of the meetings. I smiled, but it sat uneasily. I don't have the luxury. She looked me dead in the eye. You've been paying for everyone else's luxuries for years. You've earned one. And she was right. So we began planning. Nothing dramatic, just strategic. Quiet inquiries to nearby towns. Research into school ratings, rental options. I kept the business running. The tribute pages grew in popularity. I started getting thank you cards, emails that said things like, I didn't know how much I needed this until you gave it shape. And I realized something strange. I was finally being seen, not by the people I had spent my life begging to notice, but by people who had no history with me. No entitlement, just gratitude. It's amazing how light your life becomes when you start cutting off the weights you mistook for roots. Angela helped me find a modest rental on the edge of a quiet town. A small backyard, good schools, a second-hand swing set already installed. The day we moved in, I stood in the doorway holding one twin on each hip and felt something I hadn't in years control. I didn't announce it, not to family, not to old friends, no forwarding address, no invitation to find me, just gone. Of course, that didn't stop them. It took 3 weeks before the first sign appeared. A typed letter slipped through my old landlord's mailbox, asking if he'd forward it to Elise if she's willing. My name, my new town, a tone dripping in strategic sorrow. I didn't answer. A week later, a distant cousin emailed. Apparently, my mother had posted on Facebook a throwback photo of me as a toddler on her lap, captioned with something cryptic like, "You can love someone your whole life and still lose them." It got likes, sympathy. Some of my old high school teachers even commented. I watched the likes accumulate like algae on a stagnant pond, and I felt nothing, not rage, not sadness, just detachment. Like watching a movie where the actors barely resemble you, and the plot never really made sense anyway. Angela read it too. She laughed and said, "They're throwing a tantrum in lowercase font." But I knew better. This wasn't a tantrum, it was a campaign. Their reputation, what they thought they had earned through decades of carefully curated images, was unraveling, and I wasn't lifting a finger. Just being silent was enough. That's what scared them. I realized, slowly, that silence is its own kind of revolution, one they can't control, one they can't interrupt. It's not an argument, it's a boundary, a locked gate with no intercom, and it drove them mad. I started seeing small signs of unraveling. A mutual friend mentioned my parents sold their second car. Someone else said they'd downsized from their lake house. They were liquidating. Quietly, desperately. I could see the math, no more monthly deposits from me. No backup plan. My financial silence had become a landslide. They started calling Angela's number next. I had used her as a reference on a school form. My mother left a voicemail, a chipper, rehearsed. "We've been worried, just want to know if Elise is okay." Angela forwarded it to me with one sentence. "They're circling." I listened to the message once, then deleted it. I had nothing left to say. I didn't answer. The door, the first time they came. I saw them through the frosted glass, two blurred figures, one tall, one hunched, standing too close together like they were bracing against something. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The twins were drawing quietly on the floor with broken crayons, and a stew was simmering on the stove. The knock was polite, too polite, like a neighbor bringing cookies. I didn't move, didn't hush the boys, didn't even lower the flame. I just stood at the kitchen counter, my hands motionless over the sink, and waited for them to give up. They did. After a minute, no note, no voicemail, just silence retreating down the path. They'd taken years to build, and I had dismantled in under 6 months. Angela told me later she was proud of me for not answering. "You would have explained yourself," she said. "You always explain, even when you shouldn't have to." She wasn't wrong. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from narrating your pain to people who only want to hear themselves absolved. I had done that enough times to know the script. They'd arrive looking fragile. They'd use words like miscommunication and misunderstood. They'd cry the way people do when they're sad they got caught, not when they're sorry for the damage. And I would fold, not because I believed them, but because I was trained to make other people comfortable. But this time, I stayed standing. The second visit came a week later. This time, they brought spreadsheets. I opened the door, not out of weakness, just curiosity. I had a clear boundary now, and I wanted to see how fast they'd try to step over it. My mother looked thinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with pride eating itself alive. My father held a manila folder like it was a peace treaty. "Can we talk?" he asked. I didn't invite them in, just stepped outside and pulled the door halfway closed behind me. "We're not here to cause trouble," my mother started, her voice already cracking like she'd rehearsed the apology, but not the possibility that I wouldn't take it. "We've had a rough few months at my father added. "Things haven't been easy." I didn't respond, just looked at them. He took that as permission. Opened the folder. Inside were itemized lists, budgets, mortgage statements, upcoming medical bills. A letter from a financial advisor with the kind of language people use when they're one step from defaulting. They weren't here for closure, they were here for rescue. I nodded slowly, as if examining an abstract painting. "And you thought I should see this?" I said. They didn't answer. My mother's hands tightened around her purse strap. My father coughed and looked at the ground. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked, though I already knew. "We were hoping," my mother whispered, "that maybe you could help us, just until we get things sorted." I stared at them, at the people who had chosen a concert over their daughter's surgery, who had rewritten history with every email, who had sent strangers to guilt me on their behalf. "You taught me something," I said quietly. "You taught me that family is a transaction." Her eyes flickered, and I'm declining. They froze, shocked, not by the content, but by the delivery. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't crying, I was calm, resigned, which meant I meant it. "But we're your parents," she said. I tilted my head. "And I was your daughter, the one who kept your lights on for 12 years, the one who asked for help one time and got a voicemail from a jazz concert instead." She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not blind either." My father tried again. "We know we messed up, but..." "No," I interrupted. "You didn't mess up. You made choices, repeated ones. And now, I'm making mine." Behind me, the twins were laughing. Their giggles filtered through the screen door like music. Pure, unbothered, mine. "You can leave the folder," I said, "but it won't change anything." They didn't speak after that, just stood there a moment longer, like people staring at a locked door and hoping it might swing open on guilt alone. It didn't. They turned and walked away. No dramatic goodbye, no collapse. Just footsteps fading down a path that no longer led home. I closed the door and exhaled, not in relief, just in confirmation. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with locks.